The United States was mostly built upon the work and ideas of immigrants. Immigration is the moving of a person or people from one country to another. There are three periods of immigration in U.S. history: colonial immigration, old immigration, and new immigration. Colonial immigration took place between 1775. This was the time when the only inhabitants were the Native Americans and some colonies from other countries. The colonists believed that coming to America would relieve them of all their problems. They had too much hope and put too much faith into it. The first colony was made in Jamestown, Virginia in April of 1607. They faced a disastrous start. The colonists depended on finding gold and basically forgot about farming, which caused many problems. They contracted diseases from contaminated water and were struck by starvation. Another reason for immigration during this time was for land. According to the era of old immigration, vast numbers of the earliest American settlers came to America seeking land. Much of the land in Europe was controlled by nobles or the church, leaving little opportunity for the common farmer to achieve success. In their home countries, farmers had no land to make a living because it was controlled by nobles. America had so much land in their eyes. Throughout the 1600s and 1700s, more British colonies were founded, each for different reasons, and they prospered. Started in 1776 and ended in 1880. During this time, many of the immigrants came from Germany, Ireland, and England. The immigration rate grew from Europe to the U.S. because of famine in Ireland and crop failures in Germany. According to the online article, Opportunity and Exclusion, A Brief History of U.S. Immigration Policy. Meanwhile, high levels of immigration from Europe to the United States were spurred by crop failures in Germany during the 1840s and the Great Potato Famine in Ireland, 1845 to 1849, and engendered throughout Europe by industrialization. There was little food for the Irish and wasn't enough crops for the Germans. They believed that they would have a better chance with food in America and therefore have a better life. They were wrong, however. They had poor living conditions and had to face corrupt officials. The last period is new immigration, which took place between about 1880 to about the 1920s. The biggest reason that immigrants came was for the job opportunities. As stated in the era of new immigration, the greatest reason for new immigration was employment. The stunning growth in U.S. industrial development fueled seemingly endless demand for workers, which desperate immigrants willingly filled. But work wasn't what they expected. They weren't paid much and worked for lots of hours without breaks. They also weren't covered for any injuries. Immigrants fell victim to the bosses that took advantage of them. I might have said losses. I'm done.
Even though immigrants helped form the U.S., they weren't always welcomed with open arms.
An editorial cartoon by R. Cole called The Tridian is an example of the National Origins Act. It shows Lady Liberty shooing away immigrants and telling them to keep away from the U.S. because too many immigrants were coming to America.
They gave countries a quota, but only the African and Asian nations weren't given one. In this cartoon, there are two gates, one for white and one for Oriental. The two gates are blocked off by a woman that resembles Lady Liberty. This shows how the colored, aka different immigrants, were treated compared to the white immigrants, which brings me to the point of nativism and the Know Nothing Party, both which are very much connected. Nativism is a social and political movement which wanting nothing to do with Catholic, Irish, non-Protestants, and anyone who doesn't speak English. The Know Nothing Party is a group of high social people who are nativists and wanted those immigrants deported from the United States. An example is this cartoon of the Native American looking down upon a Chinese man, as there are signs surrounding him saying to leave, but he stays and refuses to.
That's fine.
Nativism was quite a huge deal in the 19th century, which a quote from Hartford Courant will explain why immigrants were treated horribly. 19th century nativism in the United States contained a strong anti-Catholic, since newly arrived immigrants hailed from predominantly Roman Catholic countries. The large waves of immigrants, many of whom were skilled tradesmen, provided a large pool of inexpensive labor that threatened the well-being of native artisans and other workers. Many immigrants would do hard labor to get a living, so as they worked for cheap, many Americans were upset due to the limited amount of jobs due to the immigrants. During this time, the Know-Nothing wanted to protect America from the immigrants, so they decided to spread their theories on the matter across the states, which caused many immigrants being forced to leave. Although many immigrants still crowd the U.S., they still had to limit the intake to the U.S. with the Immigration Act of 1924, which with the National Origins Act and the Asian Exclusion Act. The Asian Exclusion Act, often known as the Chinese Exclusion Act, was quite a big deal during the 19th century. California was one of the states where it had most of the immigrants, specifically Chinese, as shown in this cartoon of the Working Men's Party of California, kicking the Chinese out of their state to China. The reason for this was because they took all the jobs and there was less jobs available. Though that was one possibility, there was another, which is shown on this cartoon named Pacific Chivalry, where the Chinese man is being held back and is about to be whipped by California. The Chinese felt they were either being thrown away or punished for their decision to come into America, and there were thoughts of little to no peace for them. A cartoon called The One Being Bared Out is a Chinese man sitting on top of order, with industry and peace as signs saying that Chinese aren't allowed inside, while there's a golden gate of liberty behind him. This cartoon shows how the Chinese weren't given the freedom they deserved, and during that time it was probably thought that order, industry, and peace was thrown out with the Chinese. Yet even though the Chinese immigrants were affected greatly, other immigrants who were allowed to stay didn't have it much easier in the U.S.
At a time, assimilation was part of an immigrant's everyday life and in public schools. What is assimilation, you might say? Well, it's the process of being part or more like something greater. Yes, greater. So in this case, it means that immigrants were less than great. As the numbers of immigrants increased, the different faces and cultures did too in the schools. This meant children were in some way different than the others. Some people were worried about it, so they thought it was not necessary for the immigrants to be in special classes. As stated by J.F. Graff, as the numbers increased, it was found necessary to provide special classes. Attention could be given to the immigrants and more study of the English language. As this quote shows that the lack of knowledge of the immigrants caught the attention of others in power, which had them put to learn the new language to them, which was English, and be more like an American. Not only that, some immigrants were put in special classes, but personal knowledge was also retrieved by them from the schools. Also said by Graff, these schools, immigrant children, but from them the knowledge of American customs and laws that are carried by the children to the parents. This quote shows that the schools wanted to know if they didn't know anything about the American culture, or if they did, and possibly to change that. Not only that, but the law order of the family, which has nothing to do with the school. In the picture, there are Italian immigrants, which then were a big part of assimilation classrooms. Quote, in a few years, it is well illustrated by the growth in the number of Italian immigrants practicing law in Boston, by J.F. Graff. Most, if not all, immigrants were being assimilated then. For them to change and to fit in and be a part of society, which was preposterous. America was once referred to as the melting pot. This meant that the people from all over the world that came to America contributed a part of their culture to a new one, the American culture. These contributions from all these fresh cultures made it indistinguishable from one another, therefore a melting pot. Like said by Joshua D. Lorenzo in his melting pot theory that, quote, people from various cultures come to America and contribute their culture to create one new one. Quote, as time went by, the theory faded away and a new theory arose. That is the salad bowl theory. America's society is in the 21st century, and now is not called the melting pot, but something cooler, the salad bowl. This theory means that the culture of an immigrant is not lost or melted, but retained, identifiable, and not assimilated. Quote, just a little walk in the New York City or Chicago, for example, would make any foreigner realize the presence of people of various races walking down the street. Almost anywhere in America, the possibility is encountering a mix of people. By a brief history article by Multicultural Markets. This quote could not be said any better, that you walk anywhere and you will see many and different races, just like if you were to look in a salad bowl. People in the theory are the so-called salad, as where the bowl is America. America's industrial age was built off hardworking and strong immigrants. This is how the industrial age began, from them.